Welcome to this special episode of Film Seizure at the Movies. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the Film Seizure podcast that you can catch each Wednesday morning with my cohorts Jason Oliver and Chuck Moore and my solo show Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon. You can catch both of those shows at filmseizure.com. This is a topic I've wanted to cover for quite some time, and that's the Damien Chazelle 2022 epic period drama Babylon. I saw this movie about a week after its release, sometime in between Christmas and New Year's of last year, and it's a movie that kind of filled me with a lot of complicated feelings. In one regard, this is the type of perfect fodder for a regular episode of Film Seizure, but I don't think either Jason or Chuck would have the same complicated yet strong feelings that I have for the movie. Jason, notably not a very big fan of Chazelle's, and I'm not sure where Chuck stands, but I'm thinking it wouldn't be too far from Jason's point of view. So finally, after a long time of wanting to do something more along the lines of what I plan to do over the course of this special episode, I'm going to revisit a movie that I thought to myself during that original viewing back in late December that I would never really want to revisit and really try to work through some of these complicated feelings. So let's back up for a moment and before I really dig deep into this movie and talk about a few other things. In 2017, Chazelle became the youngest winner of Best Director for La La Land, a movie that, while I generally liked, I found the two main characters played by Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone to be kind of alternately unlikable throughout most of that movie. It's another movie that I think Babylon reminded me that I had kind of complicated feelings about, because the final 10 minutes or so of La La Land are kind of beautiful in a heartbreaking way. However, with this kind of sweeping love story about two people destined to find each other, but also destined to never find happiness in a relationship with each other, and maybe some brutally honest revelations about love, attraction, and reality, it's clear that Chazelle is mostly interested in being somewhat of a romantic about whatever topic he's tackling in a movie, and the same would definitely be true with Babylon. I think we should start with the title of this movie. Babylon is the name of an ancient city in southern Mesopotamia. It was basically the cultural and political center of everything that comprised of the Akkadian region of Babylonia. It's, to be sure, an important place and city for early civilization, even up through several Persian and Muslim rulers and beyond. However, the word became associated with a meaning or definition that would describe a place devoted to materialism and sensual pleasure. It would also become associated with the term Hollywood Babylon, which was the title of a book written by Kenneth Anger that delved into various scandalous exploits of famous Hollywood folks in the first half of the 20th century. That book was mostly filled with and kind of filed away as exploitation and containing a bunch of falsehoods, but it did capture the imagination of those who read it. For example, on the exploitation side of things, it had images from after a few people committed suicide, or uncensored pics of the Black Dahlia's corpse, or scenes from the traffic accident that killed bombshell Jane Mansfield. On the untrue side, there were a lot of nasty little rumors and gossip about how some actors and actresses carried on in their personal lives, particularly in their sex lives or circumstances around their deaths, especially if it injected some additional drama or particularly gruesome details. Most of those stories were ultimately debunked, but also became so juicy and oft repeated that despite these being debunked, the untruths, including Mansfield's decapitation, became truth to many people who really kind of get into the more gossipy type of stuff. And I wanted to start there with the title because there are two things about Babylon that are absolutely true. First, the setting, the era in which we are seeing these early Hollywood stars, and the transition from one era to the next, creates what I really do think is the American Babylon, as we often look to our media to give us some sort of insight on how we should feel in various situations that are often depicted in stories. The other is the Babylon, is that it's a movie that is just as sexy and kind of conceptually hypnotic as it is ugly and mean. So it does tie to that Hollywood Babylon concept that captivated people who were just looking for juicy insights about famous people from earlier eras of Hollywood. Now, as I continue to break down and break apart the characters, the moments, and the general concepts of the movie, I want it to be known that I only very briefly scanned other reviews shortly after seeing this movie myself. About the most in-depth review of the movie I was exposed to was Brad Jones's review on YouTube, and even that was kind of surface level stuff as to not give the entirety of the movie away. There were a few other positive and negative review poll quotes and such that I scanned from Rotten Tomatoes that might help explain some of the things I will talk about, especially as I get into the finale and the conclusions drawn by the overall tapestry of the concept of the narrative itself. I am sure there are ways to examine this movie on a scholarly level and tie specific things and scenes and sets and characters to film history. I'm kind of incapable of doing that. I'm giving my own interpretation and thoughts and feelings as I watch the movie. So, let's begin. There are really 3 different approaches you can take to Babylon. We're going to begin with what I feel is almost the least important entry point, the structure. It is important to understand that this is a 3-hour film. It does not possess so much a plot as it does a kind of an incredibly kinetic and short history of some specific characters through what's commonly referred to as the golden age of Hollywood, when silent films were maybe at their peak and talkies were taking off in the pre-Hays Code era. There are a handful of these characters, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but it's a long movie that covers the ups and downs and the rise and fall of at least 3 characters, while also covering the trials and tribulations of 2 more. I think my number one issue I had with Babylon wasn't the content or the dialogue or the characters. It was the length and how it sometimes seemed to contain too much content. I mean, I guess in a way I do have a little bit of an issue with the content, but there's an entire segment of the 3rd act when Diego Calva's Manny, our primary character to which we identify, has to get Margot Robbie's Nellie Leroy out of trouble with gangsters she owes gambling debts to. While I appreciate Tobey Maguire's insane performance that was probably very nearly Oscar nominee worthy, because he kind of plays this really kind of gross, sweaty, and seemingly diseased villain, it feels a little overstuffed in this movie. While the movie borders constantly on the exploitation territory, this sequence seemingly extends the movie an extra 20 minutes. So, at least an extra 20 minutes. So, I guess this kind of comes down to pacing and the script really needing a little bit more trimming and editing. Now, while I really dislike that pacing and how much of that first 30-minute debaucherous party that kind of kicks off the movie, that really kind of tells you are or you have arrived in Babylon, I really felt that could be trimmed, and how much of that last hour could be trimmed up as well. There are 2 other elements that really work for me. The more obvious one is that the cast of characters we follow throughout this movie. The 3 key characters are Calva's Manny that I mentioned previously. He's a Mexican immigrant who dreams of being an important part of the foundation and architecture of the film industry, and how powerful it will eventually become to our American culture and its export its ability to be exported to the rest of the world. Then we have Brad Pitt's Jack Conrad, the most successful and highest grossing actor of the silent era. And finally, we have Margot Robbie's Nellie Leroy, an uncompromising young woman who refuses to not become a famous actress and instead becomes a tabloid headline-grabbing it girl with drug and gambling issues. Now, while the two biggest stars of the movie, Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie, only really once kind of interact with each other directly in a scene, they are both tied to Diego Calva's Manny. It's Jack Conrad deciding that he likes this guy, Manny, for driving him home after that opening sequence party. And he gives Manny a job working in movies. At first as kind of a gopher / production assistant / Jack's personal assistant, which leads to him becoming a major player at a studio where he is directly involved with producing sound pictures early on in their existence. Manny is also the person through which we kind of meet and kind of understand Nellie. Just as we appreciate Jack through Manny's eyes, even if we can't always understand the energetic spouting of concepts and ideas flying out of his mouth about inspiring audiences and about other ideas he has for movies, through Manny's eyes, we are kind of brought into the realm of Nellie and we fall in love with her. It should be mentioned that we have one advantage over Manny. We can see Nellie's faults. We are just as attracted to her looks and body and dance moves and bravado as he is, but we also know she is unapologetically focused on one thing and one thing alone, becoming a star. She's kind of uneducated, she's foul-mouthed, she upstages established actresses, she treats others around her like steps toward her end goals, as opposed to being real people. We do see her as vulnerable around Manny, which softens her to us as well, but still, most anyone watching Babylon should not want to do anything but look at Nellie Leroy. Considering how closely the movie sticks with Nellie, her abrasiveness makes her kind of, actually very unlikable, and it's hard for people to hold on to someone like that. And on the other side of it, Jack is aloof and seemingly never really takes anything particularly seriously. He's constantly spouting those ideas that he has for movies and is always trying to move and shake in the industry. So it's really difficult to get a real honest read on him. And then Manny begins to sacrifice some of his more wide-eyed and somewhat innocent qualities and soul as he leads fictional Kinescope Studios into the sound era. He does this in two ways, and it connects to the other two characters who we watch throughout this film. The first is the jazz musician Sidney Palmer, played by Jovan Adepo. We meet him while he played that massive Romanesque orgy of a party at the beginning of the movie. He's a very good musician and takes it very, very seriously. And Manny is aware that people in the North and along the West Coast have taken an interest in the quote-unquote Negro music of the jazz clubs of that time. So the idea that leads to him basically taking on the high-power kinescope position is to put Palmer in shorts, and it becomes hugely successful. However, that hits a massive bump in the road when he's producing another short for Sidney Palmer, and he has to convince Palmer to wear dark brown shoe polish under the lights in the soundstage so he has a similar complexion to the rest of the band. To convince Palmer, Manny has to appeal to the idea that Sidney would be putting the rest of the band out of work if he didn't comply. It's a cold enough concept and argument that pushes Palmer all the way out of the business. He would rather give up the riches he got from being in successful shorts than to sell himself out in blackface to appease white people's curiosities. And he ultimately, at the end of the movie, ends up in a small club of all black people playing his music for the people who he knows would appreciate it the most. And he's the only person who really kind of walks away from everything unscathed in any way. And in that moment in particular, in which Manny talks him into basically being a black man in blackface, it's a moment that really makes us really dislike Manny. And that comes after another crappy moment for our main protagonist. In that first scene, we also meet the mysterious, sultry Asian cabaret singer, Lady Fei Zhu, played by Lee Jun Lee. She's a dear friend of Jack Conrad's and someone he confides in and shows his vulnerability to. She also takes an immediate interest in Nellie Leroy. When she and Nellie appear to kind of start this potentially and very likely lesbian relationship together, Manny fires her from her successful contract at Kinescope, basically saying that Nellie is the more profitable product, and the writing is kind of on the wall that audiences want more chaste and moral entertainment and stars. So in a matter of just a handful of scenes, after Manny reaches his pinnacle, he dumps on two people of different non-white ethnic backgrounds. And we begin to realize by the third act, there aren't really any characters that we can feel confident in liking, with the minor exception of Brad Pitt's Jack Conrad. But the problem is that Conrad is on his way out of the spotlight by this time, which also means that he's soon to be on his way out of this movie. That said, the characters are incredibly rich, even if they are incredibly shallow, and that's kind of the point of these characters. They are pushing hard to become giants of this industry that is fledgling at this stage. Babylon is saying something important about these characters, what they do and how they live their lives, that we need to kind of take to heart. We have to understand that there's hardly anything that we enjoy, particularly in the media, that doesn't come from or have some sort of very bad behavior behind it. Just because someone makes a movie or a TV show or plays a character that we love or identify with or was immensely entertained by, that doesn't preclude the actor or director or writer or producer from having done terrible things in their rise to that situation, that they made the thing that we love. Some people are better at showing their dark sides to us all, and others are better at hiding it. What makes them far more human than how they touch us is the fact that we all kind of have done something pretty bad at some point in our lives. And sometimes that leads to a successful moment in our lives, and other times it was just our pure selfish desire for a specific moment. But it does not make for the likable characters you want to spend a lot of time with. At least they are compelling. This one piece of the three-cornered triangle that makes up what I think are the easiest things to decide whether or not Babylon is worth the 3-hour runtime is the one thing I spend most of my time thinking about whenever I've gone through this movie. It's also the thing that I'm kind of most conflicted about. Even during my second viewing to do this deeper dive, I find myself boomeranging back and forth on whether or not I like the characters I spent this time with. I sure do looking at Margot Robbie. I sure do like hearing Brad Pitt talk as Jack Conrad, but do I really want to spend any extended period of time with them? Even Manny, is he a little bit too much of a dreamer or too willing to kind of leave things behind to pursue his desire to be a part of the Hollywood machine? I mean, he even talks about how he lives not too far away from his parents who immigrated to the United States from Mexico, and yet he doesn't visit them because, well, it's just sometimes easier to be on your own. What does that say about him? When I think about Jack Conrad, would I think of Jack as a friend if I actually knew somebody like that? Would he think of me as a friend? could I spend any time with Nellie Leroy that isn't cold sexual delight? I know for sure Nellie is a toxic person to have in your life and to be too caught up with. She tanks a rival's whole studio out of malicious one-upmanship. She is not innocent at all in how things play out for Manny. Jack would probably at least stand a chance to be a fun guy to hang out with night after night. Nellie wouldn't even go to your funeral after you killed yourself for her. There is one thing that I'm decidedly, though, in favor of when it comes to Babylon as a movie, and that is the deeply appreciative love of what these types of people built during this era of Hollywood history that's really baked into this film. One thing I considered about this movie as I found myself deep in thought over days after the first time I saw it came from one of the review blurbs that I saw on Rotten Tomatoes, or maybe it was baked into a larger review that wanted to specifically talk about how this movie ends. I don't remember who said it, but it put a lot of stuff in perspective for me. It was about how this movie seems to kind of come at you like buckshot. It throws a lot of things and characters and concepts at you all at once. It's kind of smart that it begins with this kind of out of control party. But the one thing that Chazelle might be doing this, not to kind of make this movie difficult to watch, but to make a point about the topic of movies and our love for them. Ask anyone on the street what kinds of movies they like, and you'll likely hear them say 2 or 3 different genres. Ask them what 10 of their favorite movies are, and you'll likely hear anywhere from 3 to 5 different genres represented in that list. One of the great things about visual media and movies in particular is that there are so many different kinds of movies that any one person could potentially love. It's hard to pin down only one aspect or one movie or one actor that you can say without a doubt or any time to think about it deeply that is your quote-unquote favorite. Okay, maybe a singular favorite or best film would be the easiest to pin down, but there's so much more that goes into the medium that makes it hard for people to pick just one element to call best or favorite or whatever. Most people won't even agree what the most important set of films are, as some will only look at movies recently or in their lifetime, while others may be looking at historical context and so forth. It's kind of what makes movies important and so beloved in our culture. Jack Conrad treats film in this way as he consistently talks about how people view movies and how they inspire them. And he's almost an oracle of sorts, because in one scene, which takes place during maybe one of the best sequences of the whole film, when both he and Nellie and about a dozen other productions are going on and filming at the same time, and it's utter chaos. And it shows how really crude filmmaking was during the mid-20s. People are dying. There are people, they're lining up to get lunch, and producers are going around and figuring out who is too injured to continue or who's straight up dead on the set or from the crew or what have you. But he's in his tent having someone type up all these elevator pitches of movies that we know today. I wish I'd have taken notes over all the movies that he's pitching and wanting someone to type up so he can remember them. But I know one of them for sure is The Terminator, made almost 60 years later. He is connected to that awe we feel when a really special movie touches us and we look at the screen in the theater or at home and we dream or we think we feel a connection to that actor or that character or that situation, or we place ourselves in those things, and we don't feel all that alone in the world. Now, Nellie Leroy represents another side, especially the phenomenon of celebrity and our kind of parasocial obsession with it as Americans. Honestly, she probably represents more, as she is also kind of that sex bomb type of girl whose looks make us want to see her and know everything that she's doing. We're swept up by her, even if she has a Jersey accent and acts like an uncultured monster at times. We still like seeing what she looks like. She's also an easy target for the systematic digestion of young women in Hollywood. She has what amounts to a decade of the limelight before she's thrown out for not meeting what people want. That could be because she's aging out, or she's not fitting the ideals of some decency boogeyman that started to establish itself in the mid-30s. Now, there's one character who we are told not to like at the beginning, but delivers the single best moment in this entire movie, and that's gossip columnist Eleanor St. John, played by Jean Smart. What she represents is the element that is going to be just as in tune with and as attached to the Jack Conrads and the Nellie Leroys as anyone else. The insider who really isn't. The person who makes and breaks the stars. The person who influences the public's opinion of these stars. She is brought in to try to sophisticate Nellie, almost in like a My Fair Lady sort of way. Although it actually is connected to another movie that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But she also is intently following the transition of Jack Conrad from number one silent star to has been the moment that sound pictures become popular. And it's in the scene when Jack confronts Eleanor about an article she wrote after interviewing him that basically makes him out to be finished. That is the moment of this movie for me. Jack likes being an actor. He likes the parties and the mansion that he lives in, and the notoriety, but he honestly likes acting. Maybe he isn't quite the pure artist that Lady Faye is, but he likes selling tickets and popcorn to people who want to see his work. He's a firm defender of film when his fiancée from New York, a Broadway star, calls the medium low art. But now he's facing the twilight of his career, and it seems as though Eleanor's article will forever label him as a has-been. And he tells her that he helped build the place that she calls home and thrives in. And he never thought of her as a friend, but he never thought she would do to him what her article kind of does, which is basically run a sword through him, really. And she tells him there is nothing that he could have done differently. There's nothing he can do to change what's happened. His time as a star has run out. It's over for him. And she tells him that he thought Hollywood needed him, and that's why he's kind of struggling with this moment now. But in truth, it doesn't need him, nor does it need her. But because she knows it doesn't need her, she knows how to survive those shifts and changes. The stars don't know this because of ego or whatever it is that makes them who they are. And that there will be 100 more Jacks and 100 more Eleanors and 100 more conversations like the one that they're having. But Hollywood is bigger than all of them. And she then delivers the greatest lines of this movie. And she says, "I know it hurts. No one wants to be left behind, but in 100 years, you and I will both be long gone. Anytime someone threads a frame of yours through a sprocket, you'll be alive again. You see what that means? One day, every person on every film shot this year will be dead. And one day, all those films will be pulled from the vaults, and all their ghosts will dine together, adventure together, will go to the jungle, to war together. The child born in 50 years will stumble across your image flickering on the screen and feel he knows you like a friend. You breathed your last before he breathed his first. You've been given a gift. Be grateful. Your time today is through, but you'll spend eternity with angels and ghosts." That one moment summing up this exact sort of thing, the sort of thing that we all kind of aspire to be remembered, is Babylon in a nutshell. After that scene, Jack walks out with something to think about. And the movie actually fades to black and plays it slow and soft and quiet before we get to the start of the final act. Now, after Jack learns that he will forever be, or that he will be forever and beloved among the angels and the ghosts, we learn that Nellie isn't thought of the same way. She has to beg Manny for help after losing a bunch of money to some dangerous gangsters. And if they don't get their money from her, they'll kill her. They don't give a shit who she is or how famous she ever was or ever will be. She stepped into a world that doesn't get starstruck by the flickering images on a big screen. Because she came from a bad situation and was, for a lack of a better term, kind of lower class, she lost her riches. She didn't know how to manage it. And maybe even more accurately, it was her father, who was played by Eric Roberts, who lost it trying to cash in on her fame and her image. So we are now in the third act, and I think, and this is where I think the missteps with all the extra crap with Nellie and the gambling debt and whatever. But however, Jack's story continues to be kind of poignant. He does get a couple of roles in crap films to kind of stay afloat, but he soon realizes that he is not well adjusted to no longer be a star and to kind of be an aging person on screen. He has one final encounter with Lady Faye, and despite seeming to be happy with a now non-famous new fiancé, who really does seem to really like him and kind of appreciate him, Jack says his goodbyes to Lady Faye, who's headed to France to be in European films, and goes to his room and kills himself. And this officially ends the silent era to hand it over to whatever will come from that and later on in the 30s and beyond. The sad thing is, if you really kind of know anything about movies, and particularly silent movies, most of Jack's films will not be remembered because many of those films he made, and it was based on some dialogue that was spoken throughout the movie, is likely over 100 movies. A lot of them, or most of them, will be lost. And what will remain will be some of the stuff written about him, which kind of brings Eleanor back into it, and some of his later crappy films. He basically was an element of only his time, and he was a big part of his time, but will likely mostly be a footnote in history. In addition, when Manny tries dealing with crime boss Tobey Maguire and Nellie's debt to him, the money given to Tobey Maguire's character is movie prop money. So he and Nellie have to go on the run. He's told to leave Los Angeles and never return. And this is after he thinks he's going to go to Mexico and live happily ever after married to Nellie, because they do get engaged. But Nellie's old ways return, and something that she told Manny years before, she decides that she's going to dance off into the night her way and ultimately disappears. It's later reported that she died at the age of 34, penniless, and probably another footnote in history. Many years later, Manny returns to Los Angeles on vacation with his wife and daughter. He set up shop in New York City in the years in between and sold radios. He shows his wife and daughter where he used to work, and he goes to the movies, and he notices, and this is something that I think we also are supposed to notice because this isn't really the case anymore, hence kind of, these better days of Hollywood. He goes in on a matinee, we presume just any afternoon, and the place is nearly full with people. And they're watching Singing in the Rain. Now, Babylon is a sneaky reimagining and sort of retelling of Singing in the Rain, as characters in both movies are dealing with the transition from the silent era, the talkies. There's a female character who kind of has a grating way of talking that she needs to be kind of cultured a little bit like Nelly was attempted to be cultured at one point. And so he's able to kind of see events in his life that mirror what's he's seeing on screen. And he realized that he did have a huge hand in what Hollywood became in the decades that followed and will continue to follow. Now, what follows in the movie is a debatable moment. Much like how La La Land had an entire segment of its finale that plays out how Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone's characters would have lived their lives if they were a happy couple and everything worked out for them. Babylon has a montage of about 100 years of film history mixed in with clips and scenes and stuff from earlier in the movie that kind of illustrates how those humbled, kind of haphazard days of early Hollywood became the massive cultural industry and many multitudes more important and successful. And, we also see kind of how our characters that we followed kind of mixed into some of that. And this is something that I have mixed emotions about for sure. I understand anyone who thinks this is a huge swing and a miss and far too on the nose and pretty anachronous to feature in this movie. I admit it kind of borders on masturbatory. In fact, I still don't know if I like it, but I can say it kind of makes a perfect final moment that is confusing, but kind of appreciated, but also oddly out of left field and too much when simply looking back on his personal relationships, Manny's personal relationships made through the movie and what he was a part of would have been enough. And it's kind of funny because it does kind of match the movie itself. It is appreciating, it appreciates something. It's also kind of confusing about how you're supposed to feel about it. Some stuff kind of happens oddly out of left field. There's too much going on when maybe a little bit simpler story or a few less characters would have been enough. Whatever it is clear though, Damien Chazelle is writing his love letter to movies. And I can't fault him for wanting to do that. So how do I feel about Babylon? I still don't really know I can easily say one way or another. I think this is one of those situations in which I can say this is a beautiful movie while also being very ugly and unflinching in portraying the movie biz as not being what we think it is. Since the days of DVDs came along, there has been this kind of effort to show behind the scenes of films being these kind of wonderful experiences for all involved. Everyone gets along wonderfully, and there are no troubles that come up that can't be chuckled at or fixed on the spot. Even when we hear about things that happen where actors get mad at stage people or directors and actors have fun, there's usually some sort of PR that's put into place to kind of excuse whoever it is that's the bad guy, especially if it's the famous person. I think if you believe that the film industry is all sunshine and rainbows between everybody who work on a production, I have a bridge I'd love to sell to you. But this is an industry of artists and people who are not your normal co-workers. They do whatever they can to get noticed or upstage people or perform more genuinely than their co-stars. It's also an ugly business. There are thousands of actors who appear in movies each year, and only a small percentage of them will appear in movies in the years that follow. So while Babylon has these moments of beautiful reverence to the stars of Hollywood's yesteryear, those angels and ghosts, if you will, it's not afraid to say it's got a fairly ugly underbelly too. And sometimes it's downright disgusting what goes on there. But that said, it's kind of also too long. And I think 40 to 45 minutes could be trimmed out of it. It maybe shouldn't be any longer than 2.5 hours. 3 hours and 9 minutes is way too long for this movie. I also recently saw the question asked someplace on Facebook, probably in some movie group or page that was advertised to me or whatever. What's the worst movie you've seen? And maybe it was asked, what was the last bad movie you saw? Or what's the most recent worst movie you've seen or whatever. But I'm pretty sure it was asking people what the worst movie they've ever seen. And someone I don't know and have really no reason to engage with or argue about this or whatever said Babylon was the worst movie she ever saw. And I don't think she's seen too many movies or thinks too critically about the media that she takes in, because while you can dislike this movie and think it's too long and think it's too full of itself, it is far from a terrible movie. It's possible some people don't like to think that something that they love, like movies, being made by people that they would hate. But whatever the reason, I have mixed emotions about the movie. But it's far from the worst movie I saw in 2022 or any other year. It's too interesting to be bad. While I had and still have my issues with this movie, I will always fondly remember the scene between Gene Smart and Brad Pitt talking about immortality and how he will someday be discovered by someone born long after his death, and how he will live again with all those people who are also long gone. There were a few other individual scenes from the movie that I also greatly appreciated that I didn't really go into any detail here. But I can tell you one thing about that scene between Gene Smart and Brad Pitt. There were no other individual scenes from the movies of last year that made me think about it more than that one. There are several other instances throughout the year that were impactful and powerful. And there were impactful and powerful moments in this movie. So despite everything, I can't really recommend this movie to anyone. But I also can't hate the film. I can simultaneously like and even border on love and dislike Babylon. It's a truly rare breed of film. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so you can be made aware of new episodes of our various shows as they drop. You can also follow us at podcast providers like SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Spotify, as well as Audible. You can also listen to the show on YouTube by subscribing there, as we upload the audio there as well. Next month, I have a plan to do something similar to this as I celebrate the 40th anniversary of the conclusion of the original Star Wars saga with 1983's Return of the Jedi. But sooner than that, I'll be back next week for a regular Film Seizure at the Movies episode as I give my thoughts on the anticipated third and final volume of Marvel Studios' Guardians of the Galaxy saga. So until then, don't forget to save me the aisle seat.